Welcome into the PFN Bengals Podcast. I'm your host, Dallas Robinson. He's your host, Jay Morrison. How you doing today, Jay?
I'm great, Dallas. How are you?
Oh, man. What a week one. What
a Monday night for you. My
God.
goodness.
Yes, absolutely. The Bengals was terrible, but at least they're not the Jets. I mean, the Jets season, 4 plays, Aaron Rodgers, done, season over. Maybe not. We'll see how the rest of their season goes, but I don't think the Bengals are quite on that level, but boy, was it bad. It was one of the worst games I can remember in recent years, probably the worst game I've ever seen from Joe Burrow. Just an terrible performance all around. Not a great way to start off the season. Let's dive into that game a little bit. I think the main story has got to be Joe Burrow. He was just absolutely terrible. We'll dive into the numbers of exactly how bad he was here in a second. But Jay, you were at the game. I mean, what were your just initial takeaways? The weather was terrible. He's coming back from an injury. Brown's defense was playing lights out, absolutely lights out. What are your overall impressions from how Burrow played and just how that offense just struggled to get anything going on Sunday?
Yeah, you're watching, and I think what I was thinking was the same thing the coaches were thinking is, okay, there's some rust here. Weather obviously is a factor. He's going to snap out of this. He's going to look like Joe Burrow. And you kept waiting for it to happen, and it just never did. And it was striking because not just seeing him play that way, but like the book on Joe Burrow is you don't blitz him. He is going to burn you if you blitz him. And Jim Schwartz came after him, and it worked. And the Browns, they're just a bad matchup for the Bengals for whatever reason. Well, I mean, I know you know the reason. It's a rush and cover league, and they rush and cover as good as anybody in the league. They've got good cornerbacks. They've got an incredible D line, and I'm watching the game, and it never really dawned on I shouldn't say dawned on me. I never thought the calf was an issue. Now maybe it was, but everything we were led to believe was, this is an injury with a high recurrence rate, and they were going to be absolutely certain they weren't going to rush him back. And so you're thinking that he's not out there unless he feels perfectly fine. Now maybe there's some doubt in the back of his mind as far as tucking the ball and running or extending plays in the pocket. And there was maybe a little reluctance to do that. But as far as driving on the ball when he was throwing and stuff, I think it was more elements related. And I know people hate hearing that because it's the same for both teams, but it's just what they were trying to do, their scheme. They were trying to do the quick game. And that's, you get the ball and you throw it out in a hurry. And you saw it on that first 3-and-1 when he just never really got a good grip on the ball and missed Irv Smith. And there's a lot of things that played into it. I see it as a blip. It kind of reminds me of a game his rookie year against the Ravens when they came after him, blitzed him like crazy. That was 27-3. And the only reason it was 3 instead of 0 is the Bengals kicked a field goal at the end of the game just to avoid the shutout. So it reminded, and that was the same thing. The Ravens just blitzed the heck out of him in that game. And that doesn't happen anymore. So Ravens come up next. They're not, since they've had the change on the defensive coordinator side, they're not as much of a blitzing team as they've been in the past. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I know we're going to get into the preview a little later, but do teams start coming after Joe now, wondering if that calf is still compromised? But in the grand scheme of things, I think you're going to see Joe Burrow return to who Joe Burrow has been. The weather is supposed to be 77 and no rain on Sunday. That's going to be good news for Bengal fans who sit in it and who root for the team to win. So I see it as a blip. I see it as a bad matchup that got exposed. And it's what week 1 is anymore. I mean, I'll have some stats on this later in the show, but it's almost like a 4th preseason game. You just really don't know what to expect in that opener. And it in no way dictates what's going to happen over the next 17 weeks.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up that Ravens game too, because I looked up the worst games of Burrow's career by adjusted net yards per attempt. That's a stat that I love. It's been shown to really correlate with winning. It counts for touchdowns and interceptions and sacks, and it's a little bit of a complicated formula, but it's pretty correlated with winning. This was the worst game of Burrow's career by that metric. The other one's week 2 versus the Bears in 2021. I think we can all remember that game. Burrow was absolutely terrible. That Ravens game you mentioned, and then the opener last season against the Steelers. Those are the worst games of Burrow's career. 5 of the worst games of his career by that same metric, they've all come in week 5 or earlier. 4 of them have all come in weeks 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So maybe Joe Burrow just can't play earlier in the season. Maybe he just doesn't thrive early in the season. Maybe this Bengals team doesn't thrive early in the season. I think we've heard people say, should the starters have played more in the preseason? Should Joe Burrow have played in the preseason? Absolutely not. Like, absolutely not.
No.
Zach Taylor's never going to do that. Joe Burrow looked rusty, yes. I think you're right, though. The weather had such an outsized impact. Deshaun Watson wasn't good either. Deshaun
No.
Watson missed a lot of throws. The Browns should have won by a lot more, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, given how their defense played, like Deshaun Watson left a lot on the table. And he was bad last year, too. So whether that was just his performance or the weather, maybe a little unclear. But I think the elements were definitely a part of what happened on Sunday. But man, Joe Burrow, dead last in EPA per play among all quarterbacks this week. Dead last in success rate. Dead last in completion percentage. Second shortest time to throw of any player in the NFL, any quarterback in the NFL. He just had no time to do anything. The Browns, I think you're right that the Browns are a terrible matchup. And I think it's probably only going to get worse now that Jim Schwartz is the defensive coordinator there. Robert Mays and Nate Tice on the Athletic NFL show talked about it, that he was constantly having his safeties rotate and spin after the snap and confuse. You could see it on the film. Joe Burrow looks hesitant. He looks like he doesn't know exactly what the Browns are doing coverage-wise. There are so many guys over the middle of the field, and I think Burrow just felt like, I have to take these shots down the sideline. He just couldn't hit them. He just could not hit them. You constantly see receivers stretching out for balls. I mean, they had T. Higgins on a slot fade against Grant Delpit, a safety. And that's a matchup you want. T. Higgins versus a one-on-one versus a safety. T. Higgins beat him, and Joe Burrow couldn't hit the throw. I mean, that's, like you said, that's not going to happen every week. We've seen this before. We've seen Joe Burrow have these blips. I guess my concern, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, is when this does happen, do the Bengals have a plan? Do they have a plan to say, hey, we can adjust a little bit and try something different, whether it's weather, whether it's Burrow just being off? Is there a plan to do something when Burrow's off? Now, most teams, when their quarterback is off, they're probably just going to lose the game. That's just how the NFL works. But a team that's going to be contending in the NFC and contending for a Super Bowl title, in the AFC, sorry, and contending for a Super Bowl title, I think you need to have a little bit of a backup plan in case a game like this happens again.
Yeah, and I think so. You talk about it being the same for everybody. The Browns had Nick Chubb, and that they were able to lean on that running game more, and I think that gave Deshaun some bigger windows to throw into. And you're right, he missed a lot of open guys. We asked Brian Callahan about this yesterday, and Joe is a rhythm quarterback, and he does not want to go run pass on third down, because a lot of times you're going to be 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 in those situations, and I think what I touched on earlier in the show is they were of the mindset that he was going to shake this off and get something going in the second half. And then once, the Browns scored right before halftime to make it 10-0, then they score again, 3 straight possessions in the second half. And it got away from them so fast. I was a little surprised. I tweeted in the middle of the game that the conditions were so bad that this was going to turn into a battle of run games. And the Bengals had a drive where they started with 4 straight runs and were really moving the ball, and they never really stuck with it. And I think that is because they didn't want to make Joe uncomfortable. And you can argue about whether that was the right thing to do or not. I think there's still a little bit of doubt on what Joe Mixon is at this point in his career. I thought he looked really good. He had some good runs, even some of the ones that weren't long. He made some nice cuts. Showed good vision. There was one 3rd and 1.
He ran really hard. He really hard
with burst, and he was making guys miss. He was breaking tackles. He was doing everything that younger Joe Mixon did. So I think that's a good sign. Again, it's week 1. We'll see how he holds up over the course of the season. But yeah, I think it was one of those things where you go into it with a game plan. I don't know, and we should have asked this, but I mean, I think a lot of people were caught off guard by that weather. Sometimes you go into a game, it's like, 80% chance of rain. You know what kind of game it's going to be. Yeah. It was like a 10, 15% chance of rain on Sunday. I think everybody knew what the temperature was going to be, but I really do think that caught a lot of people, a lot of fans by surprise. You can look down and there weren't a lot of ponchos in the stands. There was a lot of people just riding it out. So it was just one of those things where they were kind of counting on Joe Burrow to figure it out. That's what he does. And it just did not work out that day.
Yeah, they talked about it on the broadcast a little bit on how it was really testing the equipment manager teams from both squads in terms of if they brought
Mhm.
enough gloves, if they brought enough equipment to manage the weather. So everyone's kind of dealing with that weather. What about the defense? I think the final score doesn't show it, but I think they played relatively well. They were put in a lot of bad positions. I think they had the eighth worst average starting field position that they had to deal with from
Yes.
the Browns. Bengals were, I think, 2 of 15 on third down. So just constantly putting the defense in a bad spot. But I don't think they were terrible overall. They gave up some runs to Nick Chubb, but what are you going to do when you're trailing? I think you're kind of expecting that to happen. I thought Trey Hendrickson played well. He led the team in pressures. Dax Hill obviously had the interception. That was impressive to see. But
Mhm.
overall, I don't think the defense was put in good positions, but I don't really have any big issues with how they performed.
Yeah, you touched on it earlier though, that easily could have been 40-3. Where
It could have
I
been.
mean, some of there were some guys open. There were some blown coverages that Deshaun Watson just didn't make them pay for. But you're right. They got 2 turnovers. The classic have the team drive down the field and then come up with a stop late when Pratt punched the ball out or
Yep.
ripped the guys. I think it was Jerome Ford. He'd separated the ball from him.
Yeah.
Chidobe
Ford.
Awuzie falls on the ball. The Dax Hill pick you mentioned. I think the defense played well enough to win that game. You're probably going to win with that effort in
Yeah.
most situations if you get a halfway normal Joe Burrow. But one of the most encouraging was they put Cheeto on a pitch count, and Lou's made it pretty clear he doesn't like playing rookies in the secondary,
Yeah.
especially. I
Mhm.
thought DJ Turner looked good.
Yes.
And Deshaun Watson went after him a couple times, and I think that's a big thing for a
Oh,
rookie to
yeah.
get that many snaps in his first game in bad weather. All that stuff added up. I thought Pratt played really well. As also, he had a sack in addition to the forced fumble. He had
Yep.
11 tackles. Nick Scott and Dax Hill. That the big question about the communication and all that. I thought that looked pretty good.
Yeah.
So there was a lot to be encouraged by defensively. In this league, 24 maybe not be ideal, but you're going to win more games with Joe Burrow as your quarterback giving up 24 than you lose.
Yeah, I think DJ Turner especially really just kind of followed up on what he did throughout the entire preseason and training
Mm-hmm.
camp. He's really done nothing but impress since joined the Bengals, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have cornerback depth in the NFL, especially with someone with a veteran like Cheetos coming back from a serious injury. Someone's going to get hurt during the season, and to have a second round
Mm-hmm.
rookie who's already shown he can play in the NFL, I think that's maybe the most critical depth they might have on this roster. I think is to have him available if something happens. Um,
Yeah, and real quick too, it
yeah,
wasn't just either or Cheeto
yeah,
and DJ Turner. There was times they were both out there where the
sure.
Browns went 4 wide, 5 wide, whatever it was, and they needed more corners. And so just the fact that Lou was willing to trust DJ in his
Yeah.
first career game, and let's not forget too, yeah, he did look great in training camp early on, and then he had they said a lower leg or a lower body injury. It was soreness. I'm not sure what it was, but he did miss some practices leading up to the opener, and so
Mhm.
even coming off of that, it was a good debut. It was really encouraging to see that.
A rookie defensive back playing for the Bengals. Something never would have happened out of the Marvin Lewis era. I think we know that. It never would have happened.
They have first round corners that they sat for
Yes,
the entire
yes,
year.
exactly. The third phase of the game, special teams, not great. Not great on Sunday. You wrote about it,
No.
Jay. Brad Robbins, his season debut, his NFL debut, not very good. And he wasn't happy with his performance either, as you wrote about.
Yeah, well, he wasn't happy with it, but he wasn't overly concerned either.
Yeah.
He said that you just flush it, you move on, it happens. Um, it was you always wonder about rookies that how they're going to
Yeah.
react, or especially a punter who doesn't do a lot of interviews. And it was 2 of us actually. It was myself and then Charlie Goldsmith from the Inquirer. We were kind of standing on opposite sides of the poker table, which sounds weird to say in an NFL locker room. But we saw Brad, and we both were like, "Hey, Brad!" And then Charlie and I looked is like, well, let's just talk them together. And then the whole swarm came over. So Brad sat there and answered every question. And he was, obviously not happy with the way he punted, but
Mm.
he said he wasn't all bad, and it wasn't. He had some good punts in there as well. And a guy I think the media maybe are using the weather as an excuse more
Yeah.
than the players are. He absolutely threw that aside. He said, yes, it's difficult, but he's like, I went to Michigan. I've punted in this kind of weather before. This is the AFC
Right.
North. I'm going to punt in worse. I better get it figured out. So he said all the right things. He doesn't have a track record in the NFL, obviously, but
Mhm.
he does have a track record of being able to handle the elements and punt well and doing it, leading the NCAA and hang time in the last 2 seasons. So I'm sure there was some nerves there too. Your first NFL game, and like you said, they were backed up so often. A lot of
Yeah.
those, the last thing you're wanting to happen is the ball slips a little bit because it is wet. You got the rush coming, you get one
Yeah.
blocked, and so again, I think just like with Joe Burrow, I think you're going to see a much better performance from Brad Robbins and the whole team. That's another thing that people forget about is even on a roster like this where you have so much returning talent, those special teams turn over every year. And Andre
Right.
Yosivas, a rookie, was playing gunner, and Jalen Davis did play gunner some last year, but he gets a 15-yard penalty for blocking a guy out of bounds. It was just the whole operation was a little out of sync. And again, it just goes back to that's what week 1 in the NFL is, especially only 3 preseason games. Even with a lot of those special team guys are playing in the preseason,
Yeah.
but it's a mix, it's a mismatch. And it's just, I know Darren Simmons won't be happy with it, but there's one guy you can trust to get it right. And I mean, he's been in this league. He's one of the best special team coordinators in the league. He will get the special teams figured out.
Yeah, there's a lot to correct from week 1, I think, in probably all 3 facets of the game. It wasn't great, but the Bengals have been here before. They were 0-2 last season, still made the AFC Championship game. It doesn't sound like anyone on the team is overly concerned, and I think the fan base isn't even overly concerned either, which is definitely a change from how it's been in previous seasons. I think, these type of games happen. There are a lot of excuses you can point to for why this happened: the weather and the injury and lack of reps, and it just is what it is. And I think the Bengals will move forward, and it's one game, and it's one game does not a season make, right?
Yeah.
So we'll move past that game, and they'll move on. And I think I would be surprised if a lot of these issues that we saw against Cleveland are recurring issues throughout the season. I really would.
Yeah, I am with you. I think that's a lot of where the fan base comes from. This year it's the Browns. Last year it was the Steelers. It's teams. You're losing division games, and it just everybody's so excited coming off the Super Bowl last year, coming off of the success or 2 years ago, and then coming off the success last year. Everybody's expecting so much in that season opener, and then it goes south. And it's I think Bengal fans just always have that mindset of when's the other shoe going to drop,
that nagging feeling of
yes,
what's next. Yes.
Yeah. And so, they can totally erase it with a win against the Ravens on Sunday. The schedule lines up pretty nice for them the next 3 or 4 games after that.
Yeah.
A lot of winnable games. You get out of these first 2 1-1 and kind of hit the ground running after that. And I think the week 1 could be a distant memory pretty soon.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. We will talk about Bengals Ravens in just 1 second, but we did want to talk about the Joe Burrow contract real quick.
Did he sign?
It's a few days old now, but he is under contract. Joe Burrow will be a Cincinnati Bengal. Paul or Jay, you and Paul Dana and all the other Bengals reporters were at 50 West last week, and all together right when that news broke. And so we know you guys were all kind of handling that as it came in, but I think the most important thing is that he's under contract. Obviously, we can go into the details of the contract and kind of how it's structured and what it means for cap flexibility and stuff like that. But just the fact that it got done before week 1, I think, is probably the most important thing. What are your initial takeaways? How do you think this affects kind of where they are cap wise? And it doesn't look like T. Higgins is going to get an extension at this point. Yeah. But what do you think about the Burrow contract? What are your initial takeaways?
I was surprised that the guaranteed was that high. What, 219? I mean, I never thought anybody get to the Deshaun Watson 230 again. I was really surprised the Bengals got that close on the guaranteed money. They're not big on that, and that was a win for Joe. I wonder how much the contract played into what happened Sunday. It's just human nature. I mean, because it wasn't just the will I, won't I sign, that kind of stuff. It was like it broke Thursday night, as you said. He didn't sign it till Saturday morning. There's a lot of, even though they agree on terms, there's a lot of nitpicking, getting things finalized. He has to read over it before he signs it, all that kind of stuff. And
It's a lot. It's a lot going on.
It
It is a
is,
lot
and
going
you
on.
there Joe Burrow does not want anything to get in the way of his preparation,
Yeah.
and that obviously did. That's why you would have liked to have seen it done earlier in the offseason, maybe when he was hurt, when he didn't have much
Yeah.
else going
Right.
on.
Yeah.
That would have been a great time. But I do think, it all plays into his agent and Nick Bosa and getting that one done first and
Yeah.
kind of letting that news cycle play out for 24 hours. It just, the timing was not coincidental, but it's great for Bengals fan. I mean, he's going to be here through 2029. And as I wrote in my piece, that column I wrote right after he signed, he'll be 33 when this extension runs out. Tom Brady won 4 Super Bowls after age 33.
Yes,
So
he did.
he's going to get at least one more, maybe 2 more chances to sign huge contracts like this.
Yeah.
But who knows if it'll be a Brady situation where he stays in Cincinnati almost the entire career. But that was, I think, the one of the big things I was looking for in the contract was how many years, because I'm sure the
Yeah.
Bengals would have loved to have had a Mahomes kind of thing where it's 10 years and
Sure.
spread out, but 5 years on top of the 2 that already remain keeps him here through 2029. And that was the biggest takeaways, was the length of the contract, and then the guaranteed money was just it. I didn't really expect it to
Yeah.
approach Deshaun like that.
Yeah, I think generally I wouldn't even be that concerned about the guarantee for quarterbacks, just because these guys don't get cut, right? You never see these
Yeah,
guys get cut. So what's the difference in giving a guarantee? But this is the Bengals we're talking about. This is a
yeah,
different team. They don't like to hand out guaranteed money. Obviously, they broke the mold here for Joe Burrow, which you'd expect them to do. I think, just talking on T. Higgins real quick, I think that's probably the reason why T. Higgins has not accepted a contract, is the Bengals don't want to give any guaranteed money after year one. And I'm
mhm,
sure T. Higgins thinks he can find that on the open market, which I'm sure he can. Um, Back to Joe Burrow, I think Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap tweeted about Joe Burrow's cash flows just much, much higher than Justin Herbert, who already broke all the cash flow records in the
mhm,
NFL. It's 11.5% higher in the first year, 18.3% higher in the second year. So in terms of actual cash that Joe Burrow is going to get, he's at the top of the league now. Um, we talked a little bit about this over the past couple of weeks, that we didn't know how the contract would be structured. They didn't do a long contract like a Mahomes deal, like you just said. I'm sure
mhm.
they would have loved to do. They did use some option bonuses though, which kind of surprised me. That's kind of, I thought that was a little too newfangled of a technique for the Bengals to use, but they did. The one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is they didn't really create the kind of cap flexibility that we've seen teams like the Eagles do with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts' cap hits for the next 3 seasons are 6 million, 13 million, 21 million. Joe Burrow is 19 million, 29 million, 46 million. Now, they can always restructure. Joe Burrow has massive base salaries, whereas Jalen Hurts has league minimum base salaries. That's the primary difference of their contracts. So the Bengals can always restructure. That's not something they've ever done in their entire history as a front office, is restructure a contract. Um, so I think that's my general concern about the contract. I'm glad Joe Burrow is going to be in Cincinnati for a long time. Does this give them the flexibility down the line to add other talent, to continue going into free agency like they've done, to extend other players, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase? I'm It's not a problem right now. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, when Joe Burrow's cap hits are huge, are they going to be willing to do what other teams have done to create more financial leeway, to kind of give themselves that optionality and the ability to bring in other talent? I don't know. That's not something the Bengals have really done in the past. Teams like the Eagles that are heavy into analytics, they look under every stone to try and find an advantage. I don't think the Bengals necessarily do that. They really haven't had to these past couple of years. They haven't had to search for every advantage and every win on the margin. They've just been good enough to get to where they've gotten just based on talent alone. I do wonder in the future how this contract will affect what else the Bengals can do. But I think the most important takeaway is Joe Burrow is here. Joe Burrow is a top 3 NFL quarterback, and he's not going anywhere. So that's all very positive.
Yeah, and with the lack of flexibility, I think they're thinking about, as long as you've got Joe Burrow,
Yeah.
you can win with pieces around him, and really they're on kind of a heater here in terms of
Yeah.
draft picks, where it's an old school way, which is not an old school way, but it's a different way, that where the coaches are so involved in the
Sure.
scouting part, and you've really seen that pay off. What they're drafting these guys that are sticking around and contributing, and not just the early round picks, but the late round picks. And if they work under the assumption they're going to be able to keep doing that and just keep drafting and developing and kind of turning those
Yeah,
positions over that way. Eventually, you're going to have to let some of these guys go when you develop them and they get into such great
sure.
players. But I think that belief there is they've really found something here with their personnel department and the coaches and um, their input as well. So
Yeah,
maybe it's a risk, but it's hard. I always say don't bet against the trend, and the trend right now is
yeah,
they've drafted really well the last 4 drafts. So I think that they're banking on that as well to kind of keep restocking this roster. They're not going to be able to go out in free agency and get guys
yeah.
with that Burrow contract's going to have a big impact there. But I think that plays into it as well.
I definitely agree they've been on a heater in terms of draft picks. My concern is that sometimes that could be cyclical and sometimes that can be
Yeah,
kind of random. And if the Bengals have a couple, 2 or 3 poor drafts and don't bring in young, affordable talent, then what? It is a risk. It is a risk. I think you're betting on Joe Burrow to elevate talent around him, which he's proven he can do. And you're betting on this coaching staff, like you said, to go out in tandem with the front office and find guys who fit this system and can stick around. Even the late round picks, like you've written about, they haven't cut any late round picks in recent years. So I think that's a really positive sign that you've got cheap talent here on the roster. So Joe Burrow is going to be a Bengal for the foreseeable future. That's the headline. That's the positive
yeah,
takeaway. Let's get into Bengals Ravens. The Ravens won. They beat the Texans on Sunday. I didn't catch a ton of that game, but what I saw, I don't think they looked great. It was a little closer than I thought it would be. Houston is not a very talented roster. And injuries galore for the Ravens. That was the
yeah.
story of their week one. J.K. Dobbins out for the year. Tyler Linderbaum, I think, is week to week. Their center, left tackle Ronnie Stanley, I believe, is week to week. Safety Marcus Williams might be out for the year. We're not entirely sure. It sounds like he suffered a pectoral injury that it's going to knock him out for a while. We don't know if it's for the full season. Doesn't sound like
Yeah.
he'll be available next week. And then Marlon Humphrey, who had surgery during the preseason, sounds like he could play this week, but John Harbaugh said it wasn't a guarantee. So little bit of a dilapidated secondary that Joe Burrow is going to be facing. But we talked about it a little earlier that Mike McDonald, the Ravens coordinator who took over last year, really seemed. I don't think he has Joe Burrow's number quite like the Browns do, but he's done a little different scheming. He's not as blitz heavy. He's playing more zone coverage. I am curious to see what he does against the Bengals if he maybe tries some of the stuff that the Ravens did that the Browns did in terms of spinning safeties at the snap and trying to confuse Burrow. What are your initial thoughts on week two? Kind of how these two teams line up as week two approaches.
Yeah, I think a lot of Bengals fans are hoping this is going to be the magic elixir and everything goes back to normal. This is not the ideal team you want that to happen against. I think you're going to see a rock fight similar to what we saw in the playoff game last year. It seems like every year the Bengals play the Ravens, they're dealing with injuries.
Yeah.
They have backups that are able to keep the game competitive. I don't want to give away my bet from later in the segment too much, or from the show too much, but I do think points are going to be at a premium. You're going to see a better Bengals offense. You're going to see a better Joe Burrow, but you're not going to see light it up,
Yeah.
the shootout kind of game. I don't see any way that happens.
I think I would agree. I don't think that the Ravens are going to be able to generate as much pressure on Burrow as the Browns did, and it's just a different defensive scheme. I think they're going to be a little more passive. They don't really have a Myles Garrett. They've got some decent edge rushers. They have Jadeveon Clowney, David Ojabo is there, but I just don't think they're going to be able to create that sort of pressure up front that the Browns did. So if Burrow has more time to throw and has more time to process, I think more importantly, that's going to be able to give him a little better of an opportunity to look like the Joe Burrow that we know instead of last week. But I do think it'll be a close game too. I think the Ravens have a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. They're not running the same sort of 3 tight end offense that they've been running out for the past few years. It's a little more wide open. Zay Flowers, their first round pick at wide receiver, looked really good against the Texans. He already looks like he's totally pro ready. Mark Andrews, I guess, is one guy we didn't mention in terms of injuries who didn't play last week, who we don't really know if he's going to be available this week either. He said he had hoped to play in week one, so maybe that gives him a chance to play this week. He's obviously a huge loss. He is Lamar Jackson's favorite target. Isaiah Likely, their backup tight end, has done some good things in the past, but he didn't really produce in week one. I see a lower scoring game as well, only because I have a lot of faith in both these defenses and these defensive coordinators. And I am worried about those Ravens injuries if I were a Baltimore fan.
Yeah.
They're injured every year. I don't know what's going on in Baltimore. Between them and the Chargers, it's like every single year, critical players go down. Lamar Jackson is still healthy for now, but he's obviously missed 10 games over the past 2 years. And every week it seems like they miss a critical player. I don't know exactly what's going on in the water in Baltimore that's causing so many injuries. But I see a lower scoring game as well. I think let's just go ahead and get into our bets. let's go ahead and talk about what we've got. You want to start off with what you're thinking for this week?
Yeah, well, let's recap last week. Not a good week for the PFN trio.
No.
You went 0-2. You had a last play being a field goal for the Browns game. That was not the case.
That did not happen.
Yeah, the Steelers on the money line. That didn't really
not even close.
Pan out. I had Bengals minus 2.5, so I booted one as well. I did hit the Titans and Saints under 41, and then Brian Blewis, our betting director, he was on Browns plus 2.5. He won that one easy.
Got that one.
But then he also he had the Rams being the lowest scoring team of the week for 1,600, and the Panthers being the lowest scoring team of the week at plus 900, and of course the Giants failed to score a point, and he lost both of those bets. So he's sitting at 0. We're both trying to work out of the hole. This week I'm going with. I don't like the number. Bengals minus 3.5. I think this is going to be close. So I'm going to go to the other number. I'm going to go to the over/under. It's 46.5 is the over/under right now. There's only 6 times in 54 career meetings that the Bengals-Ravens number has been 46 or higher. It's gone under all 6 times. And 4 of those 6 times have been since 2019. So there's a definite trend there. It's just, even taking history out of it, I just think this is going to be a low-scoring game. So I'm going to put 10 units on the Bengals-Ravens going under. And then Brian went similar to my thought process here. You always go the opposite way of those week 1 games, especially the surprise ones. There's always the pendulum swings the other way. I'm going Steelers plus 2 at home against the Browns. I just think everybody's going to be high on the Browns. Everybody's going to be down on the Steelers. The Browns have been underdogs to the Steelers in 29 of their last 30 visits to Pittsburgh. The only time they were a favorite, they lost. They haven't won a game in Pittsburgh since 2003. I see the Steelers winning that. I think you're going to see the entire AFC North be 1-1 after week 2.
That's an interesting pick. I don't know. I haven't given a ton of thought to that game, but I don't think the Steelers' offensive line is any better or I think it's significantly worse than the Bengals. I'm curious to see how Myles Garrett and co do against that offensive line. And I unfortunately made that bet on the Steelers last week, but their offense looked so stagnant and just no juice to it whatsoever. Especially when you're watching teams like the Dolphins that know how to create space and use motion to their advantage. The Steelers do none of that. They just don't do anything besides try to get guys ISO balled 1-on-1 wins. So we'll see how that goes. My picks, I am picking the Ravens plus 3.5. But I do think the Bengals will win. I do, but I think this will be a close game, and I can't see it being more than 3.5 points. I think it'll be very tight. I think Justin Tucker will play a big role. He can obviously kick from probably farther than any kicker in the league. I think it could come down to some plays in the fourth quarter. I expect Joe Burrow to be better, obviously, but I do think the Ravens will be within that spread. So I'll put 10 units on that. And then kind of the same thought process as you said, going against those week 1 results. I'm going to go 10 units on Chargers minus 3 at the Titans. I think the Chargers are a very good team who just ran into an offensive juggernaut in the Dolphins, and they still almost won that game. A couple poor plays, pass interference, call at the end of the half that gave the Dolphins a free field goal. Chargers easily could have won that game. I think they have a very impressive offense and a lot of talent on defense, even if it didn't show up against the Dolphins. And I just don't think the Titans are very good. I don't. I thought they should have been rebuilding this year. They didn't really do that. They didn't look great against the Saints. That game, if you didn't catch it, was just as bad as basically both teams played as bad as the Bengals, but there was no weather in that game. So if you can imagine how bad offensively that could be. I don't like the Titans this year. I think the Chargers are far more talented. So even though they'll be on the road, I'm going to take them -3 against the Titans.
If the Titans put up 30 on the Chargers, then next week's bet's going to be Brandon Staley will be the first coach fired.
Yes, he might already get fired after that game if that happens. So we don't know. We're not sure. All right, let's get into our predictions for the game.
Do we want to put in Brian's?
Yes. Sorry. Yep,
he's not joining us this week, but he's
not here this week. Yes.
Yeah.
But what are his bets?
So he went Bengals money line and then the under as a parlay. So he's got that's for plus 195. He put 10 units on that. Same thing. He went with the rebound. He's going Chiefs minus 2.5 at Jacksonville for 5 units. Okay. And another rebound game. He's going Seahawks plus 6 at the Lions for 5 units.
Okay. I like those bets. I don't know. Seahawks did not look good against the Rams. I think the Lions offense looked really good against the Chiefs. That's an interesting one. We'll have to see how that goes. Brian is the expert. I'll defer to his expertise on that call for now.
Ford Field should be pretty fired up, though, to see that team come home after being
Absolutely. All right. Now let's get into our predictions. We've gone over Brian's bet. I'll go ahead and go first. Like I said, I think it's going to be a close game. I think the Ravens will be within 3.5 points. And I agree with you and Brian. I think it'll be a lower scoring affair. I've got Bengals 22, Ravens 20. The Ravens are very analytically minded. I think there could be some 2-point attempts in there. Get kind of a weird score like 22-20 that you might not see often in the NFL. That's my prediction for week 2. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going Bengals 17, Ravens 16. It feels
even
like
lower
that
scoring.
kind of even lower. It feels like that kind of game. All right, now that the picks are in, I did want to. You guys know I love stats. I've got some stats for the Bengals.
Jay's got stats.
Yeah, the people that you guys might be wondering what the heck happened last week. It's not uncommon. I went and I looked the last 3 years, teams that were coming off playoff berths facing teams that were not coming off playoff berths, and the teams that were coming off a playoff appearance are 6-12 in week 1 and those games. It's a weird week. And this year they were 4-4. The Bengals were one of the losses. Obviously the Chiefs lost, Bills lost, Seahawks lost. In 2021, those teams were 1-5 in the opener. And the year before they were 1-3. It's just, I don't know if you can say there's rhyme or reason to it other than the fact that it's just, you can't tell anything from week 1. If you remember last year, the Bears beat the 49ers in week 1 in a weather game, in a super rainy game, kind of like we saw Bengals Browns. It just, week 1 doesn't tell us anything. It creates a lot of talk show banter, but it's when we get to October, even week 1's going to be a distant memory. And I just don't think people should panic. There's a history of this, and you just really can't judge a lot off of those opening games.
I think it's easy to overreact because we spend the whole summer previewing the season, building up to this one game, and then we want to make all of our declarations after what happened in a 60-minute game in a 1-of-17 game. It's just not going to happen that way. Somebody had to win, somebody had to lose. And I think obviously the Bengals didn't play well, but we've seen this before. We've seen it last year. We saw them rebound and almost make it to the Super Bowl again. So I don't think it doesn't feel to me like Bengals fans are overreacting, which I think is a positive sign and a sign of where this franchise is, that people have the faith in them to rebound and the faith in Joe Burrow to kind of rebound. But I would just caution anyone who is overreacting to calm down. We've seen this before. It's just week 1 and things will get better. I think we both think that things will get better, maybe even as early as week 2.
It's like when you go to a concert and the band comes out and they play a song off their new album to open the show, and you're like, oh, well, this is going to stink. And then the good one. The good stuff's coming later. Just
play the hits, right?
That's right.
Play the hits. All right. I think that'll do it for this week. Jay, anything else before we sign off? Anything else on the Ravens game or anything else in the Browns game before we head off for today?
No, just really looking forward to seeing AJ Green come back. He's going to be the ruler of the jungle. Great pick there because he really roasted the Ravens during his career. I remember one conference call when we did conference calls with the opposing head coach, and John Harbaugh said, hopefully at some point before he retires, we'll figure out how to guard that guy. And, so it'll be
really happens.
AJ's not a super excitable guy, so I don't know how he's going to do getting up there trying to fire up the crowd, but I think the crowd's going to be plenty fired up on their own. Will be good to see him. I'm glad that the Bengals have reached out to bring him back. One of
Yeah.
the ones that kind of got away, so to speak, even though it was at the end of his career. We all saw
Yeah.
the writing on the wall, and it's good. The Ring of Honor, all that kind of thing, where they bring these guys back for things like this. I think it's a great move.
I totally agree. Thanks again for listening today. Make sure you check back next Tuesday. We'll talk about the Ravens game. We'll preview week 3. Make sure you're checking out all of Jay's work on Pro Football Network on the Bengals and everything else on Pro Football Network. Fantasy content, betting content, general NFL, college football network, everything you could hope for in the NFL universe we've got at Pro Football Network. Thanks again for listening. We will see you again next week.